for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. I caught the Ron Paul Liberty Report, which I'll go ahead and play that here in a second. And many of you know I've been talking about where society's headed and where we are now. And, there were points in this clip that I'm about to play that talk about, the cultural Marxism. And a lot of this, rings true today. I don't agree with every point made, but, when you see this takeover and if there is a failure, whether it's intentional or not, in these type of authoritarian type ideologies, if they seem to be losing the battle, they tend to burn everything behind them as they retreat. And in a way, I think whether they're winning or they're losing, they tend to burn down the culture that they're either taking over or retreating because they're being defeated. This ideology, it spans whether it be Western culture or even Middle Eastern culture, as we've seen, ISIS groups completely destroy historical places over the Middle East and artifacts because they want history to be told their way. They want things to be believed that they say, and they don't want any other option B, option C to their narrative. And we also see that in the Western world, Middle East. We see it globally, but when we see these types of authoritarian attempts to take over, whether they're winning or they're losing, they do just at least attempt to destroy history so they can rewrite it. So I do want to dive into this Ron Paul Liberty Report. We'll go ahead and get this kicked off first. And this was Mythbusters Ron Paul Liberty Report.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Today is the day we do Mythbusters, and with me as co-host is Chris Rossini. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. Great to be with you.
Good. What do we have on the agenda today?
Well, we're going to talk about, we're going to get away from economics and foreign policy today and talk a little bit of culture. And this is a subject that many of us deal with in our daily lives, and it's goes by the name of cultural Marxism, and it's an umbrella for PC, political correctness, environmentalism, multiculturalism. So we're going to delve into some myths surrounding these ideas. We'll start with muddying gender differences, which is pretty fascinating that we have to deal with this. But as Saul Alinsky, who was a very big influence on Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, would say, the first job of a community organizer is to create the problem. So one of the problems that we could see if we read the news is there's people that have a problem with gender identities, that if a retailer is selling blue clothes to boys and pink clothes to girls, this is a problem. So, Dr. Paul, what do you think about this?
Well, if you look at this on the surface, it looks insane. You wonder, how can they come up with these crazy ideas? And what is their goal? But if you don't understand the philosophy of cultural Marxism, it doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense whatsoever. But if you realize that they thrive on chaos, and what their goals are, the ultimate goal and the overriding goal is to undermine the Judeo-Christian moral values and the values of family. And therefore, how do we undermine that? They've tried other things to spread Marxism, but it hasn't worked. They've tried it with militarism as well as economic sanctions and economic controls, but it doesn't do the trick. So they're coming along with this cultural Marxism. And if you didn't understand what their goal is, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But once you understand what their goal is, because out of the chaos, then they're going to establish this Marxist notions, although it's modified from the original Marx. But world domination, the society that has no boundaries and no borders, and a very, very ideal, impossible situation of having no borders and everybody living in a free society and respecting other people's rights. This wouldn't be a big thing. But that's not what they're talking about, because sometimes you have libertarians say no borders and all. But this is completely different. This means no borders, worldwide unity, worldwide government held together by force, and based on the assumption that people have no ability to take care of themselves. They don't even know how to provide for themselves. So it's always in need. But the greatest need is for a few individuals who believe that they are superior to everybody else and that the average person is incapable of assuming responsibility for themselves. And they go and they take over. These authoritarians take over. So this is what they're doing. They're undermining values. And that's probably going to run through the theme of our conversation today. Always to underline values, because they want a different system of government, and they want the culture to be different. And it is based on atheistic socialism and Marxism, which will challenge, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. It really challenges the notion that are all atheists, Marxists, internationalists, this type of person, or is this just a new unique group? I think what you pointed out in the question of why are they undermining this whole idea that people wouldn't have the voluntary choice of having a store for boys and a store for girls, or a shelf for boys and a shelf for girls. It's just attacking something totally insane. And yet probably the biggest challenge to us is, why do so many people go along with it? And of course, that's part of the propaganda machine in our universities and whatnot. But yes, this is just part of the effort. If you don't have a real problem to beat the drums of authoritarianism, create a problem, and then you come in. And so often, sometimes when over history you'll hear, well, there was an anarchist who came in and he killed the king and did sort of some things. He's an anarchist, but he really wasn't an anarchist. He was a communist or somebody that was authoritarian, but he wanted to create the conditions of chaos so that they can impose their will on other people, because they assume they're superior to everybody else.
Now, in order to implement this craziness, if we could say that, they need strict censorship. And those who are into economics and are familiar with economic Marxists know that they also were against logic and arguments. It would always be shout them down, call them names. And people today, if you argue with many leftists, that's what you'll get. You won't get an argument. You'll just get called names. So the same applies to cultural Marxists. In fact, one of the earlier cultural Marxists, Herbert Marcuse, said that freedom of speech was a tool of the oppressors. And there's no need for logic, debate, and free exchange of ideas. So it's unsurprising that in American universities, it's very rare to have a libertarian point of view or even a conservative point of view. So what do you think about this, Dr.?
Well, that is a major problem. It's pervasive. It reminds me a little bit about how if there's a controversy on environmentalism or DDT or something like that, science has settled this. Of course, science is very much in flux. People even challenge Einstein and this sort of thing. But it has been settled by the politicians and by the authoritarians who want this culture. But no, they have to destroy language. They have to change the words. I've always been amazed at, I wonder where these words get changed and they gradually evolve to describing somebody. And if you use it, you're called a racist. If you don't change, if you don't modify, even though many black leaders may have used certain terms, and if you use them today, you'd be some type of a evil, segregationist and a racist. So I think that they do this on purpose to destroy language, and people get very confused. And certainly it is pervasive in the university, because it always amazes me to see some of these rebel groups on campuses claiming it's all about freedom of speech, ignoring totally what freedom of discourse is and what property rights are. And they come out and they identify, and if they don't do what the students demand, and this has been going on in my lifetime, I became particularly aware of this in the 1960s, during the time I was in the military, on how our streets were rioting. And they say that if you don't go along, you're going to be in big trouble. So this has been going on. They will change the language. They will make you comply. The professors will go along. If the professors don't endorse what the rioters are claiming that they have a right to do and a moral obligation to do, then the administrators will fire the president. The presidents they might totally disagree with this, but they might be 5 years from retirement. There'll all be all kinds of things. Oh, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to go along with this. They get intimidated for various reasons. And the people who promote this stuff tend to win a lot more victories than they deserve. But it's really sad that it's by regulating speech is what they're doing, where you can speak and what you can say and what is politically correct and what isn't. So that to me is very disturbing. It's something we have to challenge because of what their goals are. They don't want discourse. That is for sure. They do not want discourse because they don't want to know the truth. Because in a system like this, whether it's the Soviet type of system, the Nazi type of system, or this cultural socialism and Marxism, if you challenge it, you're in big trouble. And this is the reason that people have to be very much aware of this, and why it is a logical thing to find out that anybody that tells the truth, he's an enemy of the state. And whether it's Edward Snowden or Assange, I mean, all governments hate these people. Not all, but a lot of them. Look, we don't even know what's exactly going on with Assange right now. And yet, in history, if in 100 years from now the people wake up and realize what has been going on and know and understand the history that we're witnessing now, they'll say, he might have been the greatest guy ever alive to tell the world what was going on inside government. I mean, this is the greatest revelation that ever occurred in history. And yet, he's a monster. The people in this country, I imagine, maybe not the average person on the street, but the average politician in Washington is so intimidated by this because he would challenge the status quo. But truth is very, very much considered treason in an empire, and we have our own empire, and cultural Marxism is just a different form of it. It's It's a different form of authoritarianism, of a few people believing that they are godlike people and they are destined to take care of other people. Some might even be well motivated and thinking, well, the common man can't figure this stuff out. There's only us who are so smart. And yet, even though they're not smart enough to read history, even if they're well motivated to look at history and find that anybody that has ever tried this has led to disaster and has never helped the common man, but it certainly has enhanced temporarily the power of a few. But they ought to look at the consequence of what happens to the power of the few, because they usually end up in big trouble themselves.
Next, we're going to talk about another astounding development in American universities, and that's these things called safe spaces. And they're for people who are members of the oppressed groups. And apparently, if you're not a white heterosexual male, you're oppressed somehow. You may not know how yet. But they're safe spaces for you to go to shield yourself from your oppressors and get counseling and just be yourself. This is a hot topic. What do you think, Dr. Paul?
Well, this is just another reflection of the insanities of some of these ideas, because it's very perverse. First, when there were some legitimate complaints, and we certainly have had reason for people to be complaining, if you want to go back to Jim Crow laws and slavery and many other things. But they're coming in, and they're actually using this to the extreme. They're pretending they're being very oppressed, and they become the oppressors. It's a place for them to come and make the point that everybody else has oppressed us, and we are the victims, and therefore we demand, our rights. And then all of a sudden you see stuff like in Berkeley where they close down and they say, well, you can't come here. And one demonstrator was very clear about what he was thinking about. This is not philosophically removed. This is very serious. This is about whiteness. In other words, very, very racist. So they take the concern for some legitimate racism that actually happened, and they use that to say that this is the way we want it, and they become the worst racists in the world. And I think that's where it is. I think this Black Lives Matter is the whole thing. People get punished. If you are a member of the Judeo-Christian community with certain moral values, and you have serious beliefs about how people should be treated, then and you say, well, a lot of lives matter. Christian lives matter. But a good libertarian says, all lives matter, don't they? How can you say one matter? And how can you get into trouble if you don't say the exact words? I mean, why do we put up with this nonsense? People's lives do matter, but they're individual lives. They want to put us in groups, and that's part of what this is all about. Put people in groups, and then you have this various nature of defining rights. And I complain about this all the time, that you should not, see people as gaining certain rights because they belong to a group. And this came up a lot in the campaign, because I don't believe in the principle of gay rights, women's rights, minority rights, all of these things. I believe in individual rights, and every individual should be treated equally and fairly under the law. And that is so much different than saying, well, what are we going to do for this culture? What are we going to do for this other group? And there was a time when I had my congressional district, one time from farming to more industrialization near the coast. And some reporter came up and he says, all right, you don't have to be defending the farmer. Now you're going to be in this industrialized coastal country. How are you going to change your policies, and how are you going to change what you're saying? Why should I change anything? If the liberty is valuable, it's valuable for farmers and business people and commercial people. So it's all the same thing, but they want to put you in different groups. And look at all the different factions that go to Washington. You have the lobbyists for farming, the lobbyists for industry. Everybody has banking, lobbyists, the whole work. And I think that's very divisive, mainly because people don't concentrate on this whole thing of where individual comes from. This safe spot emphasizes this, to point out and people declare they are, the victims and they have to be taken care of. But they're really, I think, motivated by a form of racism and looking at, once again, the way we started this program, they want to create a problem. And then somebody else is going to come in. And I think the, quote, moral authority comes from the professors, because they go along with this, they teach the students. And of course, we have a challenge to compete with this morality superiority of our professors that go along with this nonsense.
Finally, Dr. Paul, as we discussed prior to this program, there is reason, no matter how crazy this is, for optimism. And we believe that we have the right ideas. Those who advocate liberty, it's called the non-aggression principle, and it can apply to any gender, age, sex, height, weight, whatever you want to break it down to. And this is the kryptonite of cultural Marxism. So please describe the non-aggression principle and how it can get us out of this mess.
Well, it's not too complex. Hopefully I can describe it in about 2 sentences. It means that nobody can commit aggression, initiate aggression against another person. And we apply the same rule to the government. And most people realize they're not allowed to commit aggression against another individual, but they think the government should do it for them. And of course, that's what this cultural Marxism is all about. The government's to do this to mold society. Well, the libertarian answer for this, I think, is a beautiful answer, because they claim that a free society is very divisive. Are they allow debate? They're allowed to criticize the government? No, too many problems. We don't want any of that. So they want people to, toe the line. Now, on a libertarian principle, we think it brings people together. Oh, well, how can it bring it together? Because cultural Marxism is driven by, evangelical atheists. They want to promote atheism. It's these individualism, the individualism that came out of Judeo-Christian thought. They put the emphasis on the individual being important. So how could a libertarian handle that problem? Because if you're an atheist, does that mean then you have to be a cultural Marxist? Absolutely not. The thing of it is about libertarianism, it legalizes freedom. And it literally, and people have to understand this. This is the part that some people don't like. You have to legalize those people that totally disagree with Judeo-Christian values, as long as they follow the non-aggression principle. If not, then people come together. And I would say so often in my speeches, which was well received by young people, is that if you legalize freedom, you should have progressives, you should have other people, all minorities. They should come together, because what they want is their own life. They want to be treated as equal. They want to have equal justice under the law. So we should come together as the super lobbyists for liberty. And then once you have your liberty, if you follow the rule, don't hurt anybody, you can lead your own life. Your life is your own. This is so much different than this antagonism that cultural Marxism is motivated by atheism, and we have to eliminate those Christian that has family values. And I think that's where we are today, and that is the struggle. And I think that when you look at it on the surface, it looks pretty much that we're losing the fight. But I'm still very optimistic, although there is a lot of people on campuses now supporting this nonsense. There was a lot of people that were probably pretty annoyed at Berkeley with what was going on there. And it's interesting to note that during my presidential campaigns, my largest crowd ever was on Berkeley campus. So I think if they're presented this issue of what liberty means, allowing them to make personal choices, personal social relationship, personal sexual choices, personal economic choices, that all of a sudden you're not a threat to them. And that brings people together. So that's why I'm so confident that spirit is still alive and well. Although we have people on campuses that seem to endorse cultural Marxism, and a lot of professors, that we have to overcome that, and we do. We have the introduction of libertarian groups on college campuses, and literally millions of young people are actually looking and saying, this makes sense. I was most pleased when young people would come up to me and talk to me after a speech. They say, this doesn't seem so complicated. This is just common sense. Well, let me tell you, I agree with that. because it shouldn't be complex. I think liberty makes common sense. I think we need to go one step further. The evolution of liberty has taken literally thousands of years, certainly a lot in the last several hundred years, the evolution of free markets. And there's no reason in the world we can't win this fight against cultural Marxism and go one step further to providing an environment where we can really expect peace and prosperity. That is the day I'm waiting for and working for. But I do have a quote that I want to close with H.L. Mencken's quote, because he sort of addresses this, and I think it's a neat quote about the importance of the individual. And Mencken wrote this probably 100 years ago when he was working, I believe it was the Baltimore Sun. He says, the most dangerous man to any government is the man who is able to think things out for himself without regard to the prevailing superstitions and taboos. Almost inevitably, he comes to the conclusion that the government he lives under is dishonest, insane, and intolerable. So those prevailing superstitions are those cultural Marxism. So Mencken understood it 100 years ago. A lot more people understand it today. We don't have the prevailing attitude of the professors of the university of this country. But believe me, we do have a chance for us to let this become the prevailing attitude of the next generation. Chris, I want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Paul.
Very good, and I want to thank our audience being with us today for the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report, RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Check them out, subscribe. Again, it's things that I've been talking about. It's kind of all summed up in one, but the breaking down of our language, breaking down of definitions, breaking down of historical facts, where we actually have institutes now teaching historical fallacies based on their opinions. And that becomes a real issue when you're trying to speak to people that have been brainwashed with a lot of fiction. And, we all experienced it to a certain point there. Definitely if you were in public schools, you were, brainwashed to an extent. And we've all kind of, at least I believe most of my listeners have broken through the fallacy and are more connected with what the reality of the society and the situations we live in today. And, being brought up that you live in, this free world, and you look back and you go, when we were being taught that this is a free world, it wasn't. It never truly was. But that doesn't mean that we scrap all the history, because the fact still remains that a lot of what they were pushing for, our founding fathers especially, were pushing for, was a freer world. No, they weren't perfect. No, they couldn't get it perfect. For, what they achieved was extraordinary for what they were coming out of. But it's really complex, because then you have to look at the situation that, they had a king, but also the situation where they were, a colony that was far off from the kingdom. So, it was where they were able to experience freedom, understood what freedom could be, maybe even if they didn't fully have it. And that's what they were trying to fight for, that ability to create a society that may not be perfect off the bat, but it could slowly become that bastion of freedom. And there, you can argue, the character of certain people. I've read a lot of the journals and a lot of the texts from those days, and understanding their flaws and understanding the individuals that were able to see the flaws in themselves and take that into consideration. And these were there were plenty of founding fathers that were very critical of themselves, and they were inward lookers, where they didn't try to look at all the flaws of others. They go, how am I flawed? How can I relate my flaws to others in a way that says we can't stand for these flaws, and we have to recognize these flaws. Even if they weren't always successful, there were certain founding fathers that pushed for this. Now, when we look at society today, we're so far off from that. And again, they're destroying history and language to accomplish these goals. And this is actually happening worldwide. Why would it happen worldwide? Why are we seeing history repeat itself? Well, a lot of it is right place, right time for agendas that others have been wanting to implement. And this is on multiple levels, whether it be some of the groups that want to create a more united world, meaning they want to bring the allies into a alignment that kind of breaks down barriers. And they've kind of successfully done it in the EU to a point, not meaning that it's helped the countries of the EU, meaning that they created the EU and have this dictatorial power over these countries, which you had the Brexit, and it's not going too bad for them. Like they predicted, you'll fall apart if you leave the EU. Well, not so much, but we also have factions that are playing into the misinformed. Outside forces that want to help manipulate things. They're playing into the false history narrative. They're being taught false history. Let's use this to our advantage. And what we are seeing is that division being preyed upon domestically, foreign, and by the elites. I really think we're at an extraordinary point in time where we are susceptible to a complete cultural decay. And the one thing that could spark it off is something to do with the grid. And I'm not just, talking about power grid. I'm talking, which that's a possibility. But what I'm talking about is a grid that has become a part of everyday life for many people around the world. And that's the internet. When the internet is no longer safe, that creates a problem for many people. Definitely people that are now relying on the internet. And we've seen a attack on the internet. Could that have been a test run? Could that have been, poking the bear to see what happens? And if the bear doesn't wake up, maybe the tranquilizer dart they put in place worked. And the one of the big things about this is there's people that are playing a part in this that don't realize it and really aren't even aware because they're not doing something that particularly is being a danger to any group or certain person, but what they're doing is kind of that poking of the bear to see. It's that tranquilizer, really. Meaning we've seen the hacking. We have WikiLeaks that is exposing hacked emails. We have hacking groups out there that are active. We have foreign governments that are hacking. We've kind of lived in this era that we're kind of oblivious to it now. It's not this huge deal. Even though we just had this huge hack go on, they slightly covered it in mainstream media because now it's, it happens. That tranquilizer dart has worked. Now what if they really go after the internet? What if they make it something where something happened and you don't even want to use the internet anymore? You got smartphones out there. Almost everything is done over a network, and a lot of it through the internet. Think of the disruption this could cause. And when you got things sparking off and the division you have now, you just need that one thing to, make it go. And it's full on. Then we have economic situations that we're in too. Another thing that could happen. And I'm going to play part of this clip. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but from AMTV, and this was with Craig Smith, and he talks about the financial chaos and inflation that is coming. And Christopher Green, Craig
Hey everybody,
Smith.
I'm Christopher Green. You're watching.
Sorry. Let's try to adjust that volume there. Hopefully it's not blasting you. Okay, here we go.
AMTV, Alternative Media Television. I am with Craig Smith, Chairman of Swiss America Trading Corporation, an investment firm specializing in U.S. gold and silver coins. Mr. Smith founded the company in 1982 out of a bedroom in his home with $50 in his pocket. Craig, that's pretty impressive, man.
Well, thank you, Christopher. It's great to be with you. And a lot of that has to do with a great wife that I've been married to for 39 years. The old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. I was in the business and could not find a company that I felt I could control the customer experience. So we started out of what was to be a nursery of one of my children at one time. And it just kept growing. And we just seemed to be, if we treated people the way we wanted to be treated, the company just kept growing and growing and growing. At one time we had offices in Switzerland. 3 offices in California. And of course, with the advent of computers, we started way before computers. And so with the advent of computers and high-tech telephones and mobile phones, we were able to consolidate everything here at home base in Phoenix. So we're just very grateful. We've had over 65,000 customers. We've had over 1 million inquiries for information to the firm, and we're delighted to be on AM TV today. And I really appreciate and respect what you've done with your organization. It's really a great alternative for people to watch.
Well, thank you. Really do appreciate that. We were talking over the break that, it's fight night tonight, right? Debate number 3, round 3, Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. Any specific expectations tonight? Things you're looking for?
Well, expectations and things I'm looking for may be a little two different things. I expect Trump to come out very aggressive. I don't think he's going to let Hillary off the hook very easily on Benghazi, on the economy, on immigration. I think all the issues that he should have been a little tougher on in past debates, quite frankly. And I really hope that he stays away from some of the issues that, quite frankly, I don't think the American people care about anymore. I think the polls are starting to show that. Hillary Clinton, I think, is going to be pretty predictable. I think she's going to stay on script. I mean, she's very disciplined. We know what we get with Hillary Clinton. It's going to be, another 4 years of what we've already seen, slow growth, if not any growth, in my opinion, and a continued move towards centralized government, bigger government, more welfare, more control of our everyday life. And that's why, quite frankly, my co-author and I, Lowell, back at the beginning of last year, we started to put together the pieces of the new book, because we're starting to feel across the world, Chris, not just in America, that people are wanting to get away from bigger government. Would our founders ever believe that the government would now be the largest employer in America, that they employ more people than any particular industry? I mean, it's kind of like the welfare rolls. Most people don't realize this. Do you know that every dollar that's spent on welfare, food stamps, Section 8 housing, do you know only 19 cents of every one of those dollars actually gets to a person to help them with their food and their rent and so on and so forth? 81 cents goes to paying for the bureaucracy that oversees it. So I think at the debate we're going to see big government Hillary Clinton against an unknown Donald Trump, who I truly believe wants to change things in Washington. Whether he's capable of doing it, whether he'll do it the right way, I don't know. But the people I speak to on the street anecdotally, Christopher, I think they just want change. Even if it's change that doesn't work out right away, they don't want the status quo anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is just one big bureaucracy. There's so much focus and myopic attention on the debate, right? Kind of this political dichotomy that's occurring right now. There's a lot of vitriol, a lot of hate, right? We're seeing this with the election. I think something that Americans are overlooking is what's coming after the election, financially speaking. For example, the Federal Reserve, we've talked about this incessantly on AMTV, has held interest rates at 0%. Essentially, they bumped at 25 basis points, but essentially we're still at 0% today. What do you think is going to happen from here? I mean, if Hillary Clinton gets in, is she going to change policy? Would it be any different with a Donald Trump presidency? What do you think comes next?
Well, let's look historically, and I think that will give us a good idea of where we're going in the future. Presidents really don't have the ability, Christopher, to make an economy good or make an economy bad. I love when we hear about how Bill Clinton, balanced the budget, which was nonsense. It was a projected balanced budget and a projected surplus. All presidents can do is create an environment in which confidence is there for investors to invest, for people to work, for the consumer to go out and buy and purchase. We were talking off air about how people are getting married at an older age now. And I think a lot of that's because people don't know if their jobs are certain. They don't know what they're going to be able to afford, if they can afford a new car, or they're very uncertain about the future. So that being said, which president is going to make America more confident in the future of America? Because if we gain our confidence back, then the trillions of dollars that are held in savings accounts today will be released into the free market. Animal spirits will return, and you'll start seeing people being willing to take more risks. We're still under a certain amount of shell shock from 2008. And a president needs to come forward and say, okay, look, we've been through that. We went through it. We're going to allow the Federal Reserve to normalize rates. Yes, things are going to become a little bit more expensive. And yes, the federal deficit, we're going to be spending more money on interest. But we got to get back to things as normal. Christopher, my first mortgage payment was at 12.
I just want to say, you hear a lot of people talk about companies not investing. Well, when they know that the interest rate is artificially low, they're expecting, when interest rates go up, things are going to cost more. They need more capital in the future to invest. And if they're not making enough now to even have more capital to start investing even more now, then they're going to have to save a certain amount for the prophecy that interest rates are going up. But we don't know what the Fed is going to do. They're artificially low. They should have been up already. But then keeping them artificially low has put them in a pinch where now they're afraid to raise them. It's a big mess, really. Back to the clip.
Percent in 1977, and we thought we were getting a heck of a deal. 12%. Today, my daughter and son-in-law bought a new home. They got 3.5%. It's like, that's ridiculous. But confidence is the key. And I don't think Hillary is going to be able to instill the confidence. When I hear Jill Stein from the Green Party come out and say that Hillary Clinton will get us into a nuclear war, I mean, I can't say I disagree with Jill Stein, because she's already proven she doesn't know how to deal with the Russians. Everybody remembers the Russian reset, and our relationships with Russia have never been worse. And I find it almost funny that the party of peace, the Democratic Party, who wanted to pull out of Iraq and out of the Middle East, they're now wanting to engage Putin instead of talking like Donald Trump is saying, hey, let me sit down and talk with the guy, see if I can negotiate this thing out. So confidence is going to be the key. The Federal Reserve has to say, we're confident in this economy and we're willing to start neutralizing or normalizing interest rates. Zero interest rate policy has caused the slow growth, has caused the retarding of big business, quite frankly, and it's just never worked. If you look at Europe, we now have negative rates. Look at what it's done to those economies. So people have to keep in mind that zero interest rate policies work for small countries that are not mega countries like America or Russia or China or one of those things. If you're a Venezuela, zero interest rates may work perfectly well. They don't work in America. So to get back to the basis of your question, Christopher, we need confidence. We need somebody, excuse me going back this far, but a Ronald Reagan that says, we're America, we're the shining city on a hill. We can win the Cold War. We can put people back to work. We have to believe in being Americans. Yes, you're an African American, an Italian American, a German American, but we're all Americans. Mm-hmm. And we've got to get away from this whole idea that we're a nation of immigrants. We're not a nation of immigrants. We're a nation of citizens. Immigrants come here and they become citizens. That's what makes a nation. And I think if we were to get that type of confidence back, Christopher, I think the best days of America are ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really hope so. Now, you were showing us on camera a $100 trillion Zimbabwe note.
Right.
Now, is that a consequence of 0% interest? I mean, what if they don't normalize? What if instead of normalizing, we follow Europe and we see negative interest rates here and we see, risk assets propelled higher than they are today? Could that Zimbabwe note be kind of a microcosm to what's potentially coming here to the States?
It surely could, because governments have certain ways that they can deal with massive amounts of debt. And as you know, we have a $20 trillion immediate debt. We have $200 trillion worth of long-term liabilities. The way you deal with debts of those sizes, you either default on them, you just say you're not going to pay, and then the dollar goes crazy, or you say you're going to restructure the loans on a longer-term basis, maybe turn your 30-year bonds into 50-year bonds or 60-year bonds. Some nations are looking at 60 and 70-year bonds now. Mm-hmm. Or you print your way out of it. You create oodles and oodles and oodles of money until it becomes worthless, very similar to what we saw in Weimar Germany. And this is what Robert Mugabe did in Zimbabwe. People forget Zimbabwe used to be Rhodesia. Rhodesia was a very prosperous nation, a very economically stable nation. And then the Mugabe people came in and started printing money just like Juan Perón did in South America, just like Hugo Chavez did. And next thing you know, you saw the consequences of it, of inflation running crazy. We've seen the pictures recently. I'm sure you've done stories on Venezuela where people can't get food and they're standing in line. So could this happen in America? Probably not to the extent that it has in Zimbabwe, because the U.S. dollar is still considered to be the cleanest shirt in the dirty closet, if you will. I mean, we're the best currency of all the fiat currencies that are out there. Mm-hmm. But every fiat currency, and that merely means a currency that is backed by nothing. See, most currencies are backed by future productivity or a commodity, like when we were on the gold standard, it was backed by gold. When you have a fiat currency that is not backed by anything and can be created out of thin air by the stroke of a key of a button without connecting productivity to it, Christopher, it ultimately ends up in hyperinflation. And let's keep in mind, I love using this example. Let's take the average guy. He goes to work. He works 40 hours a week. Let's just say he takes home, just to round numbers off, $1,000 a month. He brings home $1,000 a week. And at the end of the year, he's made $52,000. Okay? He has worked 40 hours times 52 weeks, so that's a couple thousand hours of labor to bring home $52,000. They can push one button at the Federal Reserve and create $52 billion without ever having to produce anything, without ever having to put something in the bank against it. And you can't continue to create currency like that and expect that currency to have a long-term value. It's just not going to work.
What is your view on gold, over the next few years? We know it's a store of value. We know the dollar isn't tied to it. It's basically just, a piece of paper. There's no difference between the dollar bill and the $100, bill, piece of paper that it's printed on. Where do you see gold and precious metals in general going from here?
Well, I never, in all my career and being in the precious metals industry and coin industry, I've never made a prediction on price because it's a fool's errand, quite frankly. Gold is a numeraire. It's a pure asset. It's an asset that's not somebody else's liability. In other words, if you have a share of IBM stock, it's your asset, Christopher, but it's IBM's liability. Gold, on the other hand, doesn't have a liability tied to it, so it's referred to as a numeraire. So in that respect, gold never goes up or goes down. Gold remains the same. And the same amount of goods and services that gold bought 100 years ago is the same amount of what an ounce of gold buys today. That's why the U.S. dollar has lost 98% of its value since the early 1900s. And if you look at gold in terms of the British pound, the euro dollar, or I mean the euro, or you look at in other currencies, gold has actually gone up dramatically because it takes more euros to buy an ounce of gold. When the euro was trading 150 against a dollar, it took far less euros to buy an ounce of gold than it does with it trading at $1.10. So my point is, Christopher, that gold never goes up or down. Yes, it does in terms of dollars or in terms of yen or in terms of yuan, but all gold does is maintain its buying power. And that's the thing that people really need to grasp, that let's just assume today your overhead is $1,250 a month, just hypothetically. If you put an ounce of gold away, whether it's a year from now, 5 years from now, 20 years from now, it'll still pay for that 1 month's worth of food and rent and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So people say, well, gold's going to go to 1900. It really hasn't gone to 1900. It's just going to take 1900 US dollars to buy it. It may take far less in another currency that's stronger. And what we have to come to grips with is that's why many people, and pretty important people, are talking about gold at $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 an ounce. I've never been willing to do that because, quite frankly, Christopher, it's not going to make any difference. Because if gold goes at $10,000 an ounce, you're going to probably be paying $10 for a gallon of gasoline, or $5 for a loaf of bread, or a dinner out will cost you $1,000. So I hope people use gold the right way. If people if you're looking to speculate in the price of gold, that's not the same as putting gold away as a pure asset, as a currency, if you will, that's universally accepted. You know, if I take a $20 bill and a $20 gold piece and I go to Wall Street, everybody knows what the two are. But if I go to the deepest jungles of the Amazonian jungles and I show a native there a gold piece and a $20 bill, they're going to know what the gold is. They're going to have no clue what the $20 bill is. Mm-hmm. Gold is universally accepted as a currency, and that's why right now, and I think you would tend to agree with this, we are headed for financial chaos. I don't want to say a collapse or catastrophe, but we're headed for a financial brick wall. I mean, everybody says it. It doesn't take a genius to figure it out. You can't keep living on your credit cards forever. When that happens, all gold is going to do is protect what you've worked for. It's all it's going to do. It's not going to go up or down. I mean, you may see, hey, in the Great Depression, gold went down at first, and then it went up 75%. So I hope you don't think I tried to skate your question, because I really didn't try to. But
no, I don't think you did. And I would have, tend to agree with you. I mean, trying to determine or forecast the price of gold or any other asset for that matter, can be really a fool's errand. But I've always viewed it as a store of value, a diversification tool that I just think should be a part of everybody's long-term game plan. It sounds like you're more in the inflation camp. Something that I see around me, and I get feedback from my audience all the time. I mean, housing, rent, food, all these things, are just getting more expensive. One commodity that hasn't is oil, and people have noticed this, at the gas pump. What is your opinion of, where that market is today? Do you think that was a little bit of a managed collapse? Is it a result of the breakup of OPEC? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's keep in mind with oil that we only have to go back 17 years ago, 1999, and oil was $9 a barrel. But we tend to get hung up on the whole idea of when Hurricane Katrina hit us and gold went to $147 a barrel, which I wrote a book prior to that called Black Gold Stranglehold, The Myth of Scarcity and the Politics of Oil, where we predicted one day we'd see oil at $150 a barrel because of the shock that can happen in a supply chain like a Hurricane Katrina. Today with oil I think it's trading right around $50 a barrel. I think that's where it probably should be right now, given the global demand for oil and the massive amount of oil we have. See, Christopher, for years, the belief was that we were running out of oil, that oil was a finite supply. And we dispel this myth in the book that we wrote. We showed that Hubbard's peak, this whole idea that a well produces and then all of a sudden starts depleting and doesn't produce any further, is total myth. We now have more proven reserves of oil than we've ever had in the history of the world, and yet we've used more oil than we ever have. We will not run out of oil. I would argue that water is going to probably be more scarce than oil over time. Mm-hmm. So oil at $50 a barrel is the right number today. It wouldn't surprise me if it dropped to $25 a barrel, nor would it surprise me if it went to $150 a barrel. I don't think oil is as easily manipulated as most people think, because think about it. If it was that easy, the Saudis wouldn't be in the trouble that they're in financially with their budgets. All they do is shut off the spigot for a couple months, and the oil will go back up to $100 a barrel, and they'd be able to make up all their deficits. So I think oil is priced where it should be, and I'm enjoying the lower gas prices.
Yeah, no, it's been a bonus definitely to, I think the working, in middle class, which still hopefully exists in America, although a lot of that's changed under, the presidency of Barack Obama, and it seems, tougher to hold on to that. Swiss America just put out a 12-page executive summary titled Money, Morality, and the Machine. It's a free report. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, actually, we're going to even go one step better. We now finally, the original report was a precursor to our book, Money, Morality, and the Machine. And for people that watch AMTV, if they contact the number that you have or go to your website, we'll actually send them a complimentary copy of the book. It's 230 plus pages. And the premise of the book is our founders said that they built the country as a constitutional republic, a democratic republic, if you will. And John Adams said that in order for it to work, it must be run by men of moral and religious values. Now, isn't that interesting? Do we have Washington, D.C. filled with moral men and women right now? I would argue that we don't. Mm-hmm. Okay, do we have religious values? And I'm not talking about Christian or Jewish or Buddhist or Hindu. I'm talking about just a belief in a set of principles. Don't cheat, don't steal, don't kill. We don't have that anymore.
Don't lie.
Yeah, I mean, these are things like people benefit from lying nowadays until they get caught. Mm-hmm. But what we did in the book was we looked at what the founders said about the founding of this nation, and then we looked at how money has really ruined morality in America. I mean, think about it. You'll see a Hollywood person do the most crazy things to basically be immoral, if you will, if they get a $100 million contract. I mean, I can give you a handful of stars that have done that. I can show you people on Wall Street that did very immoral things in 2006 or 2008 and got paid bonuses while the taxpayers were bailing out the banks, for Pete's sakes. There's no morality there. But we knew this was coming as a nation. In 1961, in his farewell address, President Dwight D. Eisenhower said, and I'm paraphrasing, beware of the military-industrial complex. He saw something that was happening, Chris. He saw that this military-industrial complex was forming between Washington and contractors, and that war was good for the economy. He saw it after the First World War, and he saw it after the Second World War. People want to talk about how FDR got us out of the Depression through all of his works programs. Nonsense. We had a total collapse of the industrial base in 1939. It was World War II that got us out of the Great Depression. And Eisenhower understood this as a war general because he saw what happened. Congress would appropriate money to defense contractors to build bullets and bombs and boats and planes and all the things that we need for defense. It's important that we do that. We need to be a strong nation. But then what happened? Those defense contractors would then in turn send a portion of that money back to senatorial campaigns, congressional campaigns, and presidential campaigns. And next thing you know, there became this incestuous relationship between politicians and contractors. And that worked very well during the Second World War, during the Korean War, during the Vietnam War. And then all of a sudden peace came, but we still had one war going. What was it called? The Cold War. Mm-hmm. And this money kept flowing, and it was a wonderful relationship. And Dwight Eisenhower said, be careful of this. It's going to cause problems. Well, then Ronald Reagan came along, and we as a nation defeated the Russians. We ended the Cold War. Now there's a problem. Defense spending shrunk dramatically. So if defense spending shrunk, our politicians weren't getting the same amount of cash flow for their campaigns, were they? So next thing you know, in steps Wall Street in the mid-90s. And Wall Street says, hey, if you could change some of these laws, or we could merge our banks and with our investment houses and make these big super centers, if you will, like J.P. Morgan and many of the others, why we could probably be pretty liberal with you politicians with the money that we give. Next thing you know, in 1999, after several years of negotiating with Wall Street, Bill Clinton abolishes the Glass-Steagall Act, which put a wall between banks and investment firms, Christopher. Now, all of a sudden, what money was not being spent and coming back into D.C. through the military-industrial complex, we started seeing it come through the Wall Street complex. Mm-hmm. And next thing you know, Wall Street went crazy. And we could go all through, all the different CDSs and CDL and all the different mechanisms, mortgage-backed securities that created the crisis in 2008. Wall Street gets in trouble. They get bailed out. They still get big bonuses, and that money from Wall Street keeps flowing. Why do you think Hillary Clinton didn't want her speeches to Goldman Sachs and UTB Bank and these other organizations made public? Because she knows that that's how she gets this money to run her campaign. She knows that's how these senators get it. So, Christopher, this machine grew. Now, not only did they need money, but they needed voters. So what better way to do that than to expand the welfare state? Let's start spending more money on welfare checks. We've got more people on disability insurance than we've ever had in the history of this country. All of a sudden, we're getting more injuries? Quite the opposite. Workplace is safer than ever before. We have more people on food stamps now than we've ever had. We have more people on Section 8 housing, and I could go through all the different areas that we have.
No.
Did we see an abolishment of Obamacare or the reduction of spending? No. I mean, it's this incestuous relationship. So getting back to the book, we talk about how you have no control over this big machine that's been built throughout the years. The politicians are not going to let go of power. We know we have no morality in the nation anymore. I mean, you and I know moral people in our personal lives, and I know you're a moral guy, but that's not the norm in Washington, D.C., Christopher. So therefore, the net result of that is going to be a devaluation of our money. But that's one thing you do have control over. So what we suggest in the book is that you diversify, and this is where we kind of started this conversation, you diversify a portion of that hard-earned money that you have that's in savings or retirement or your IRA or money that you take home, and you put it in something like gold, not all of it, but 10%, 15%, so that as the effects of this machine continue to crush the middle class, continue to create larger government, an ever-growing welfare state, which ultimately will hurt this nation. You have never seen a nation people forget, Christopher, we're still a young nation. I mean, many nations have collapsed. Shall we go through the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Athenian Empire? We could go all the way back. Nations don't last when they overextend themselves the way that we have. And we think that America can never fall. Well, if we have a government that was built on morals and religious principles, and we built a government that was based on a constitution with a sound money system, and we now completely ignore the Constitution and have justices that are more political than they are constitutionalists, and you have men that are not willing to make the tough moral decisions necessary to lead the country through good and bad times, then you can assure yourself the money is going to be affected. And that's what this book does. There's a law, real quickly, that's called Gresham's Law. It says bad money forces out good money. In other words, as we printed more and more paper dollars, the gold $20 gold pieces and the gold-backed currency that we had was forced out of the system. It was put in, people held it in their own possession. We have issued a law in this new book. We call it Smith's Law. And it basically says that bad money, the more bad money that we create, the more debt we create, is creating bad morals. So we're saying bad money forces out good morals from a society. And look, I'm not a Puritan. I'm not a perfect man by any stretch of the imagination. Like all of us, we've all made mistakes. But we all know right from wrong, Christopher. I mean, we see these WikiLeaks things, and Hillary said this, but she only said this, and she did. I mean, all the obfuscation and stuff, and Mr. Trump says he never said this, but there's a tape that he did say this, and come on already. Let's just be honest with each other. We all know we're human beings. Let's be honest, and let's get this country back on track. And let's remember one thing. We're all Americans. We're all in this together. I love when people say, well, I don't care if we're $20 trillion in debt. Doesn't bother me. Every man, woman, and child that lives in this nation is currently $52,000 in the hole, because we, the people, are the government, Christopher. I think we think of the government as some entity that just owes us money. We, the people, are the government. Yeah, we're absolutely. The people that owe this money.
Yeah, we employ the politicians. They're supposed to listen to us, right?
Yeah, and think about it. How could you run AM TV if the people that you paid told you what to do? Now, I'm sure you're a smart guy. You take their input, you have creative meetings and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, Christopher Green is responsible for what happens to AM TV. We have it just backwards in America. The politicians tell us how they'll do their jobs. What, have we lost our minds? This is not the way it's supposed to be. And quite frankly, we spend the first 35 pages of the book talking about Brexit, how England decided to leave the EU, saying we want to be a sovereign nation. We want to get back to what made Great Britain great. Okay? This is the theme of Donald Trump. That's why there's a good chance. And look, I'm being apolitical in this interview, but there's a good chance Donald Trump can win this. Everybody's written him out of this. They said that the Brexit vote would fail, remember? That they'd never vote to leave the EU. Okay, the odds makers in Las Vegas were stunned when Britain decided to leave the EU. People need somebody that will go to Washington, D.C. and shake this thing up, because we are so far off the rails, Christopher. We're going to have to break a few eggs to create a new omelet. And look, I don't like to say this. It breaks my heart to, especially to a young man like you. We're getting ready to have some tough times, okay? It would be best if we had another depression. And people say, oh, how could you say that? Well, go read Sebastian Junger's book called Tribe and interview some of the people in Sarajevo that will tell you that it was better when the war was going on than when things got better, because people all of a sudden just took things for granted. Talk to the people that survived the Second World War during the Blitz in London when they were in the bomb shelters. Okay, they were a nation that was fighting together for the benefit of their nation, for a brighter future for our children. I feel like a lot of Americans have given up, and that's why I wrote this book. This has been the hardest book of all 7 books that I've written. This is my 8th that I've ever written with Lowell. And Lowell will tell you he's worked harder on this book too, because we really believe that this book is a roadmap to helping get America back to where we need to be. And look, if you talk to anybody that's ever overextended themselves and, say, taken a personal bankruptcy, they hated it when it happened. It was embarrassing. It meant a lot of cutbacks. It meant you couldn't go out to the movies on the weekends. It meant, buying ground chuck versus, sirloin steak. But guess what? People will tell you 5-10 years later it was the best thing that they ever did, because it taught them how to rearrange and get themselves back on the right path. And Christopher, this nation needs a realignment like we've never needed it before.
Yeah, it really does. And we need to stand united. That's one of the things I see now. It seems like there's so much division. Like you pointed out with the 2-party system, which is really just one party. We need to come together, right? We need the country to get back on track. I do agree with you, too. We would have been better off if there was a depression, 2008, 2009. We would have been already out of it.
No doubt.
But they just keep manipulating, basically what's going on.
Christopher, you just said something that's so important. You are absolutely 100% correct. If we had taken our medicine, let's say when the crisis hit in 2008, remember the process. Bear Stearns got in trouble, so it was J.P. Morgan that took over Bear Stearns. Okay, and then Merrill Lynch, John Thain announced that they were in trouble, so they had Bank of America with Ken Lewis go in and take over Merrill Lynch. Remember, and then all of a sudden Lehman Brothers, which by the way was formed during the Civil War, for Pete's sakes, they've been around for a while. And then finally, Hank Paulson said, we're not going to bail them out. And all Cain broke loose. They should have let Bear Stearns fall. They should have let Merrill Lynch fall. They should have let the big banks that were over-leveraged fall. They should have let the whole system collapse. I remember this, and you'll remember this, Christopher. Remember the TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program? We were told by Hank Paulson that if we don't get this in place, the markets in Asia won't open up on Sunday. Remember that whole spiel?
Yeah, absolutely. They told us there'd be martial law. I mean, they told us it was total
blood in the streets, and it'd be the end of the world. Well, that weekend, the Congress talked about it on Thursday and Friday, and that weekend they couldn't come to a resolution. Sunday, the markets opened in Singapore and Hong Kong. They were down a little bit. Wall Street opened on Monday, and it was down significantly. But guess what? The world kept rolling, didn't it? The whole following week, they negotiated the TARP in Congress. And they couldn't come to a conclusion. And Hank Paulson said, you've got to do this. If you don't get this done, we for sure will see a total meltdown this weekend in the Singapore and Hong Kong markets. I'm sure you remember the news reports. Okay, we didn't pass it. The markets were down again a little bit, but they were stabilizing, and life went on. Finally, midweek, the following week, the Congress added $85 billion worth of pork barrel spending to the TARP legislation. It passed the House, went to the Senate, got signed, and put into action. Now, my question is simple. If we were on the edge and we were able to go 2.5 weeks without any relief, how close to the edge were we really? And I would argue we weren't close at all. And if we had just allowed what's called Schumpeter, who was an economist, he called it creative destruction. In other words, you let the chips fall where they may. The people that made mistakes should go out of business, and they would be bought up by companies that made proper decisions. Okay, it's like in the car business back years ago. There are a lot of car companies, Packard, and we go through all kinds of the old car companies that went out of business because they weren't managed properly, and they were bought up by companies like Ford and Chrysler and Chevrolet and so on and so forth. And we still kept manufacturing cars. Creative destruction in an economy is a very positive thing, because if you're a bank that's not being managed properly, you shouldn't be in the banking business, Christopher. It's just like a television network. If you're not running the television network properly and it's not making any money, it's time to go probably do something else. And that's the same thing that we had in 2008. And if we had just allowed it to collapse, you are so right, Christopher, we'd already be back to, in my opinion, 3 to 5% growth. We'd have very low unemployment. America would be back on the mend. Because think about it. The average person that lost their home and everything, they're pretty much back to snuff. They've cleared their balance sheets. They've reduced their debt. They've got their house back under management. The only person that didn't do that was the federal government. They took on more debt. They got bigger. They started spending more money. Okay? It can't happen. And that's why I don't wish a depression, but we're going to need a depression. Now, this time the depression will not be deflationary like it was in 1933 or 1929, and that's what the big concern is. You know, your house will be worth $200,000. It's now worth $300,000. Okay, I don't believe that's going to happen, because the politicians will always do what's most politically expedient. Do you think they're going to allow America to go through that type of pain? No, they'll just start printing money. As they print money, your house, instead of going from 300 to 200, will go from 300 to 400. You'll be happy. You'll be feeling better, but your currency will be devalued. All of a sudden, risk assets that you talked about will go up. Stock market will go up. Gold will go up. All these things. Will your dollars be worth less? Yes. Will you have to work harder for your retirement? Absolutely. But the government doesn't care about that, because let's be honest, we're nothing but slaves anyway. I mean, think about it. How much of your hard labor, Chris, every year goes to pay for your state, federal, and sales taxes? I would argue that you don't even get a paycheck until sometime in late April, early May.
Yeah, there's so much truth to that, Craig, and there will be consequences. And again, who takes it on the chin? It's the middle class. It's, the regular guy on the street. But, I've argued for some time. I've been doing this nearly 10 years. You don't need to put your head in the sand. I mean, you can take action. You can diversify your investments. There's a lot of things that you can do to protect yourself, protect your family. I always say, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Be smart about what's coming. And I do know that there's going to be consequences. Now, the book is available now, correct?
That's right. For AMTV viewers, we have a very limited amount of them. The first printing was only, I think, 25,000 copies, and we'll go through them pretty quick. Okay. But if I would almost beg everybody to read this book, Christopher. Let me tell you why. Because, for example, we quote Tim Cook in here in one of our chapters. It's called The Money Changers. And Tim Cook from Apple says, your children will not know what cash is. Yesterday, Forbes magazine released an article with Tim Cook saying, with Apple Pay and all the other cryptocurrencies and all coming out, your children won't know what cash looks like. Now, how did we know that's 4 months ago? Okay, before yesterday's news article from Forbes. Mm-hmm. Because there's simple things, you know, a sailor can tell you, depending upon how the sun sets, he can tell you what the weather's going to be like tomorrow. There's certain things in the economic future that are so predictable right now, Chris. And if people read this book, they'd understand why we got in this position. We'd understand why we're not going to get out of it, because you don't have people that are willing to take a stand, Chris. I mean, think about it. What do we really need in Washington, D.C.? We need guys to say, Social Security is a scam. Okay? We don't have a lockbox. We spent the money. We are running.
Okay, I'm going to stop there. Again, that was Christopher Green, AMTV. Check him out, subscribe. Now, you can check out a lot of Austrian economics, and you see all this, you know, laid out exactly what would happen. And, you know, you can go back to even books by Ron Paul, which, you know, he points out, you know, these aren't new ideas. These have been talked about. But what is taught is Keynesian economics, and its effects are real, and they're here, and we're dealing with them, and things aren't really getting any better. I know we are kind of getting short in the broadcast. I do want to play a short clip. Hillary just held a press conference following the announcement FBI to reopen email investigation. This is due to revelations and new emails that have come up. And she hasn't spoken out until just now. And she's calling on the FBI to release all information on new probe. So people are like, yeah, let's hear all the dirt. But the thing is they're investigating. Meaning they're not going to tell her or the public all of what's being investigated right this minute. They're not going to get into details because they're investigating. We'll go ahead and play the short. It's only 4 minutes. So give me a second as I pull this up. Just going to pull the first source I got. Here we go. Get past this.
Great. Good afternoon. I'd like to say a few words and then take your questions. I have now seen Director Comey's letter to Congress. We are 11 days out from perhaps the most important national election of our lifetimes. Voting is already underway in our country. So the American people deserve to get the full and complete facts immediately. The director himself has said he doesn't know whether the emails referenced in his letter are significant or not. I'm confident, whatever they are, will not change the conclusion reached in July. Therefore, it's imperative that the Bureau explain this issue in question, whatever it is, without any delay. So I look forward to moving forward to focus on the important challenges facing the American people, winning on November 8th, and working with all Americans to build a better future for our country. Thank you.
Start with somebody right here. Have you or any of your advisors heard from Comey or anyone else at the FBI today? And are you concerned at all that these new emails that they say they've found will in any way reveal classified information that you sent or received?
No, we have not been contacted by anyone. First we knew about it is, I assume, when you knew about it, when this letter sent to Republican members of the House was released. So we don't know the facts, which is why we are calling on the FBI to release all the information that it has. Even Director Comey noted that this new information may not be significant, so let's get it out.
Secretary Clinton. You have 11 days to go. What would you say to a voter who right now will be seeing you and hearing what you're saying, I didn't trust her before, I don't trust her anymore right now, and they're heading to the ballot box tomorrow?
You know, I think people a long time ago made up their minds about the emails. I think that's factored into what people think, and now they're choosing a president. So I would urge everybody to get out and vote early in all the states that have early voting, because I think Americans want a president who can lead our country, who can get the economy working for everyone, not just those at the top, and who can bring our country together. I offer that. I can do that. And I'm very confident that the American people know that. And we're going to continue to discuss what's at stake in this election, because I believe that it's one of the most consequential elections ever.
Secretary Clinton.
Thanks very much. Secretary Clinton, there are some reports that these emails were found on devices that belong to your aide, Huma Abedin, and her husband, Anthony Weiner. Have you spoken to Huma? Was she able to give you any information about that?
You know, we've heard these rumors. We don't know what to believe, and I'm sure there will be even more rumors. That's why it is incumbent upon the FBI to tell us what they're talking about, Jeff, because right now your guess is as good as mine, and I don't think that's good enough. So we've made it very clear that if they're going to be sending this kind of letter that is only going originally to Republican members of the House, that they need to share whatever facts they claim to have with the American people. And that's what I expect to happen.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you all.
Weiner?
And she walks off. So that was her press conference she just held. And really, it doesn't really leave any answers to the many, many questions that have been brought up. And what I'm betting on is that what it's going to show is she didn't release actual, work-related emails that she said that she released. I think that's going to become very apparent. Some people think it's WikiLeaks emails. Some think that it's emails found on other devices. The speculation, I think, will come out that it is on someone's device. And the statement that the FBI made suggests that they related it to a different case that they are investigating, which I would believe to be Anthony Weiner. But we'll see. We'll see. Maybe Miss Albert, whatever her name is, might have shared some stuff. Who knows? But we'll get into that here in another broadcast when more information comes out. Because really, we're just now getting some information that they are reopening the case. And it all started from a unrelated case. And I got a short clip here from We Are Change covering the release of these emails. Give me a second here. Here we go.
Wow. Breaking news is happening right now as the FBI decided right now that they're reopening up the investigation on Hillary Rodham Clinton and her private email server. This news just broke. Every media organization is on it right now. They are going to be reviewing newly uncovered emails in Hillary Clinton's investigation. This information came from Jason Chaffetz at first, an elected member of our government, who said that the FBI director just informed him that he learned of the existence of emails that appeared to be pertinent to the investigation. Case reopened. Again, huge breaking news. And I know a lot of people here have been saying, you guys are crazy to say that Hillary Clinton's going down because of all these emails. We've been saying it for a very long time, and this is horrible news for Hillary Rodham Clinton. This is devastating news that should end her presidential run and her campaign. Again, the FBI learned of new emails linked to this investigation that they're going to be opening up. The FBI Director James Comey said in a statement, quote, in previous congressional testimony, I refer to the fact that the FBI had completed its investigation of former Secretary Clinton's personal email server. Due to recent developments, I am writing to supplement my previous testimony. In connection with an unrelated case, the FBI has learned of the existence of emails that appear to be pertinent to the investigation. I am writing to inform you that the investigation team briefed me on this yesterday, and I agreed that the FBI should take appropriate investigative steps designed to allow investigators to review these emails to determine whether they contain classified information, as well as to assess their importance to our investigation. Although the FBI cannot yet assess whether or not this material may be significant, and I cannot predict how long it will take us to complete this additional work, I believe it is important to update your committees about our efforts in light of the previous testimony. This is huge news, and as we know, Hillary Clinton did send out classified information. James Comey did go on the national stage and said that she was extremely reckless and there was classified information. Barack Obama lied to the American public, covered up for Hillary Clinton. It came out in the WikiLeaks emails that Barack Obama knew she was using a private server and that he told the American people he knew nothing about it. Lied, covered up for her as president of the United States. Again, pushing for this criminal to be president of the United States. Could this be linked to the recent mysterious tweets by Kim Dotcom, who says that Hillary Clinton's emails could be recovered? On the tip of this huge payoff FBI scandal exploding in Hillary Clinton's face recently, coming out that Hillary Clinton's allies gave over $500,000 to the wife of the FBI agent on the email probe. Again, this is huge. And again, many people are very skeptical, and they should be, because the FBI agents actually questioned Angelina Jolie more and longer about child abuse than questioning Hillary Clinton about her emails. Again, many people are saying it's a sham. They don't have much hope. But with this latest news, it will have a tremendous effect on the 2016 presidential election. Breaking news. Share this with your friends. Stay tuned on wearechange.org. We're going to be covering this and a lot more on this YouTube channel. Support us on Patreon.
wearechange.org. We Are Change on YouTube. Go there, subscribe, check them out. Now, does anything actually come out of this? A lot of talk is, well, you got 11 days. They're not going to even probably finish up a investigation within that 11 days. And if she gets elected, that it goes away. Will it, will it not? Impeachment, you know, what all could happen? I don't know. But I think that even though the polls might not always show it, that I think Trump, I've said this before, has had the people willing to go and show up. Where in Hillary's case, the only ones showing up are the diehard Hillary people. And I think that in this election, that'll say a lot. And then revelations of new emails that they're going to reopen her email case. I think it's going to finish her off. So, again, it's not said and done, but if Trump gets in office, what will he do? Will he put her in jail or will he pardon her? That will be your first telltale sign. Will he let the justice system play out, or will he pardon her? And that's if anything comes of it. But maybe that's why they reopened it. Maybe either they want to actually investigate, or they are trying to help Trump out, or they feel like they can properly investigate because they believe Trump's going to win. I don't know. But it's pretty interesting that they did this. She did seem surprised about it, and she did her laugh, smirk, smile that she always has. The pretty, go-to smile and laugh that she always has. She looked like she was surprised about it, where I think that before she might have knew things going on, where now they were able to kind of spring this up. Maybe they feel more comfortable. I really think that's might be what it's coming down to, is they feel more comfortable to investigate. I do have a few other things I want to cover. One, all 7 defendants found not guilty in refuge occupation trial. This is about Ammon Bundy, Ryan Bundy, David Fry, Kenneth Medenbach, Shauna Cox, Jeff Banta, and Neil Wampler. The end of 6-week trial for 7 people who took over the Mahler National Wildlife Refuge in eastern Oregon can be summed up in 2 words: not guilty. And I think that was who it was. Yeah. A 12-person jury found occupation leaders Ammon, Ryan Bundy not guilty Thursday of the government's primary charge, conspiracy to impede federal officers by force, threat, or intimidation. There are 5 co-defendants: Jeff Banta, Shauna Cox, David Fry, Kenneth Medenbach, and Neil Wampler have all been found not guilty as well. Jurors were unable to reach a verdict on Ryan Bundy's theft of government property charge. Lisa Ludwig, standby counsel for pro se defendant Ryan Bundy, said her client and the rest of the defense attorneys had a simple approach. He appealed to common sense, Ludwig said. The jury returned its verdict after less than 6 hours of deliberations, with a new jury member who entered the process after a last-minute replacement of a juror when a question surfaced that he was biased. The jury was instructed to disregard days of previous work and to reconsider the evidence. On Thursday, U.S. District Court Judge Anna Brown, whose coffee mug appeared to read, "It is what it is," began by reading out the not guilty verdict for Ammon Bundy, the leader of the occupation. "Did I read the verdict correctly?" Brown asked the jury for confirmation. There was little reaction in the courtroom to Bundy's acquittal, but it quickly became clear that no one in the case would be found guilty of the alleged conspiracy to impede federal workers from doing their jobs. The 7 acquittals came on the birthday of President Theodore Roosevelt, October 27, 1858. Roosevelt was a champion for public lands who created the Mahler National Wildlife Refuge near Burns, Oregon, by a presidential order in 1908. Despite the victory in court, Ammon Bundy attorney Marcus Mumford insisted the acquittal did not go far enough. After the verdicts were read, Mumford told Brown his client should be allowed to go free. Ammon Bundy is scheduled for transfer to Nevada, where he faces charges for the Bunkerville standoff. Brown told Mumford that his client was not allowed to leave, but the attorney persisted, raising his voice as he argued with the judge. The incident ended with Mumford being tackled by several U.S. Marshals and Brown clearing the courtroom. There is a hold for Ammon Bundy and Ryan Bundy out of the District of Nevada, said Matt Schindler, hybrid counsel for defendant Kenneth Medenbach, following the verdict. There's nothing Judge Brown can do about that, Schindler said. So acquitting him here, all it does is effectively release him to that hold to be transported to Nevada. Marcus left the emotion of the moment, I think, overtake his better judgment, Schindler said. Despite the shuffle, the defendants and their attorneys were elated with Thursday's trial result. "We came to Oregon, to Harney County, seeking justice," defendant Neil Wampler said after his acquittal, "and today we found it." Wampler said he and others within the so-called Patriot movement plan to build on this tremendous victory for rural America. The message of the acquittals opening the door for future protests was something defendant Shauna Cox directly addressed on the steps of Mark O. Hatfield United States Courthouse in Portland. "Absolutely," Cox said when asked if she will participate in future protests. "We can do it peacefully." Cox called Thursday's outcome just one win in a larger movement to change how the federal government manages lands in the American West. The United States Attorney for the District of Oregon, Billy J. Williams, was less pleased with the outcome. "While we had hoped for a different outcome, we respect the verdict of the jury and thank them for their dedicated service during this long and difficult trial," Williams said in a statement. The charges stem from the 41-day armed occupation of the wildlife refuge in eastern Oregon's high desert. The armed protest began January 2nd and ended when the final 4 occupiers surrendered to the FBI on February 11th. During its case, prosecutors presented dozens of firearms and thousands of rounds of ammunition investigators recovered from the refuge after the occupation. For many weeks, hundreds of law enforcement officers, federal, state, and local, worked around the clock to resolve the armed occupation at the Mahler National Wildlife Refuge peacefully, said Greg Bretzing, special agent in charge of the FBI in Oregon. "Although we are extremely disappointed in the verdict, we respect the court and the role of the jury in the American judicial system." Prosecutors initially charged Almond Bundy, his brother Ryan, and 24 others with conspiracy to prevent Bureau of Land Management and U.S. Fish and Wildlife employees from doing their jobs. Some defendants named in the indictment also face weapon charges for carrying firearms in federal facility, as well as theft of government property. Only 7 defendants went to trial in September. Others have pled guilty or are scheduled to go to trial in February 2017. It was not immediately clear what effect the acquittals will have on pending Oregon case. Throughout the government's case, prosecutors attempted to show the jury evidence when the alleged conspiracy began, as well as how occupation unfolded and ultimately ended. The government relied heavily on testimony from law enforcement, including Harney County Sheriff David Ward, as well as dozens of FBI agents who responded to the occupation or processed evidence at the Mueller Refuge after the occupation ended. At the end of the day, there is an element of common sense that demonstrates the guilt of these defendants, Assistant U.S. Attorney Ethan Knight said in his closing arguments during the trial. These defendants took over a wildlife refuge and it wasn't theirs. Conversely, the defense sought to make its case about a political protest, one about protesting the federal government's ownership and management of public lands. The people have to insist the government is not our master, they are our servants, Ryan Bundy said during his closing statement to the jury. Bundy added the occupation had nothing to do with impeding and preventing the employees of Mueller National Wildlife Refuge. The occupation fueled a long-running debate about the role of the federal government when it comes to the managing of public lands, especially for ranching and other natural resource-based professions. Throughout the armed protests, Almond Bundy frequently said their goal was to shift the federally owned land to local control. During press conferences and interviews, Bundy frequently said he wanted to get the ranchers back to ranching, get the loggers back to logging, and miners back to mining. While federal prosecutors worked to keep their case focused on conspiracy, the trial quickly came to symbolize a growing divide between urban and rural America. How did any of these people benefit from protesting the death of rural America? Attorney Schindler said during his closing statement to the jury. Five of the 7 defendants took the stand in their own defense during the trial. Almond Bundy's testimony, a centerpiece of the defense, stretched over the course of 3 days and included stories about growing up on a ranch and his family role in the 2014 armed standoff in Bunkerville, Nevada. With the first Oregon trial concluded, the Bundy brothers and several other defendants who participated in the Mueller occupation will now travel to Nevada, where they face charges for their roles in the 2014 armed standoff that took place on their father's ranch near Bunkerville, Nevada. That was out of opd.org news section. So, there's mixed feelings. I think that picking the wildlife refuge, I've seen, what they done out in Nevada. They were getting their property back. There's a lot of mixed feelings, and I have mixed feelings about it. Only because we're in such a point in society that I didn't expect this result out of the jury. Now, there was a lot of talk about having the ability to have jurors that were not, urban, that they had people from outside of, the urban areas. So they had rural Americans on the jury. And because of that, they had people that understood what was going on. These weren't people, some hipsters in Portland, Oregon. These were, people out in the rural areas that understood what was going on. Not saying that some hipsters might not, but for the most part, if that would have been a whole jury of people from the city, their results would probably not have come out the way they are. I live in Indiana, considered mostly a red state. But if you look on a map closely, you'll see that it's red for the most part, except for, the bigger cities within Indiana. They tend to go Democrat because there is a really big disconnect from rural America and urban America. And again, why you can't have a one-size-fits-all. That's why the only true one-size-fits-all is true freedom, where people can live the lifestyle of their choosing. As long as they're not harming other people. We heard Ron Paul talk about this earlier in the broadcast in that Ron Paul Liberty Report. We have to be able to accept differences. That doesn't mean that you have to adhere to someone's beliefs, but you also can't abridge their rights to force them into your beliefs. You don't have a right not to be offended. You can't force things on people so you're not offended. That's not a right. You don't have a right to not be offended. You have a right to be offended. You have a right to, that offends me. Okay, it offends you. And what you have to do as a human being, a grown adult, is suck it up. Because there's a lot of stuff that offends people. I always use it becomes a snowball that is going down the side of a mountain and just gaining mass. And what that turns into is, your car offends me, your house offends me, your face offends me. What are you willing to outlaw that offends people? And now we're actually seeing that in the colleges and public schools and Halloween gatherings where, you can't offend people. Well, what offends people? Oh, clowns now offend people because bad people did bad things with clown costumes. So if someone in a Superman costume robbed somewhere and then another person does it, then are we going to start outlawing Superman? Where does it end? And again, you don't have a right not to be offended, because in doing so, you would abridge other people's rights, and now they're offended. Snowball effect. Okay, give me a second. I had an article here. I wanted to maybe skim over here real quick. Okay. Now, a lot of people know I'm a big proponent of medical marijuana, definitely. I don't believe in the war on drugs, too, on top of it. I think prohibition doesn't work. Marijuana, people choose to do it recreationally. That's for them to decide. But I do think that marijuana holds medical benefits. I'm not a doctor. I'm not, the scientist. I've done research. And from what I've researched, there are a lot of studies that are coming out of places that are reputable, that are showing medical benefits or the possibility of medical benefits from marijuana and hemp. But even marijuana with the THC has other, certain benefits. And now this out of Reason.com, marijuana legalization looks likely in 3 states. According to the latest American Values Survey conducted last month by the Public Religion Research Institute, a record 63% of Americans favor making the use of marijuana legal, up from 43% in 2012 and 44% last year. That result, which was released on Tuesday, comes a week after Gallup reported that 60% of Americans think the use of marijuana should be made legal. A record for that survey, and 2 weeks after the Pew Research Center reported that 57% of respondents in its latest survey endorsed the proposition. Yet another record, but as Washington Post drug policy blogger Christopher Ingram notes, these results do not necessarily signal a clean sweep for the 9 marijuana initiatives on state ballots a week from Tuesday, since the surveys use national samples and do not ask about production and distribution of cannabis. A look at the latest initiative's specific polling suggests that marijuana will be legalized for the recreational use in California, Maine, and Massachusetts, while Florida will become the first southern state to recognize marijuana as a medicine. General legalization looks iffier in Arizona and Nevada, while medical marijuana initiatives seem headed for defeat in Arkansas and Montana. A lack of recent polling makes the outcome in North Dakota harder to predict. Here is the breakdown, and they have the full breakdown right there. And then it had an update on Thursday. The Arkansas Supreme Court disqualified Issue 7, the more permissive of that state's 2 medical marijuana initiatives. The court said 12,000 of the signatures collected for Issue 7 were invalid because the measure's supporters had failed to comply with the state's rule for registering petition circulators. So you could go check it out. That was at Reason.com under marijuana legalization looks likely in 3 states. And again, medical marijuana, I think, is probably something easier to pass in a lot of these states that are really iffy about doing it. Thanks for tuning in tonight. Stay tuned here on UCY.TV. Great broadcast coming up after this. And, don't forget, go to UCY.TV, scroll down to the bottom, click the Amazon tab, shop Amazon through UCY.TV. UCY gets a little kickback to help cover operating costs. And, I always tell people, look at gold, look at silver. We heard the interview from AMTV today. I really am someone that believes in it, and I invest in it myself. Gold, silver, these are things that the same value of it that you could have bought, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. You can buy that same amount with that same amount of gold. It's something that holds its value, unlike the U.S. dollar. Check Amagi Metals out, antityrannynews.com/metal. Again, /metal, Amagi Metals, antityrannynews.com. Stay tuned again here on UCY.TV. Great broadcast coming up here in a second.
Adventures on the Tracks you can catch every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time